Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for some of us that are listening into our Social Gastronomy in Practice series. I am very excited to actually be hosting Derek from Wiisinig in the United States. That's going to share a little bit about his story and his organization and movement, really, that he's building. So with no further ado, I'm just going to make a quick introduction to what social gastronomy in practice is, and then Derek, the floor will be yours for the next 45 minutes. So social gastronomy in practice was born because our amazing network has so many great models and approaches that others can learn from and where we can actually co-learn actually. So we are bringing to life this series of podcasts for people to get a little bit of an insight on opportunities, on challenges, on different models and perspectives. And yeah, that's a little bit to what this series is about. And so now, Derek, I do want to kick us off with a question that we ask all of our participants, which is, what does social gastronomy mean to you?
Social gastronomy, what it means to me, that's a great question. At the end of the day, I think it just comes down to being a good relative, taking care of everybody, whether it's a relationship one-on-one or taking care of a community, taking care of yourself, taking care of the water, the plants, the animals. I think that kind of defines social gastronomy for me is just thinking about our relationships with all of creation, that we're all part of this web of life and that no one's more significant than another, and making sure that we're striving to make a bright future for everybody.
Thank you. And so now let's get a little bit to the why you started your project, and we'll hear about the actual model in a little moment. But let's talk a little bit about the why you got active, and actually speak to yourself as well a little bit. That's linked to the why clearly.
Well, I started Wiisinig LLC is because growing up, there wasn't really much resources to access learning about our traditional foods, our language, and our culture. It's something that I was really hungry for to learn, and unfortunately, there was nothing out there. You really don't see any, living in the United States, you don't see any Native American restaurants. I mean, there's maybe one or two now, but growing up, there was practically zero. And it makes no sense because why would there not be a Native American restaurant in the land that, Native Americans are from? And there was just no information out there about how to learn about our traditional foods, the language, and the culture. So as I started to learn more and more and more, I wanted to create an educational platform so that people could access these things. So we Sinig, we do a lot of education around the community, teaching people hands-on, but then we also form and create resources that are free and accessible. So there's no barriers or restrictions for people to learn these things. So it's a passion of mine. It brings me joy, and hopefully to continue this work and do this for a lifetime.
Thank you. Just like many entrepreneurs, there's a need and you couldn't find something, and so you started finding solutions for that.
Right.
So tell us a little bit more about the project, about how it works on a practical level. You talked about education and sharing resources. Obviously, there's a youth engagement element as well that I'm aware of. So just tell us a little bit about the actual model, what you do.
Oh, it's really hard to put a bow and tie on it because our food is so interconnected to everything. We might be doing plant walks and teaching kids about different plants, how to harvest it for food, for medicine, utility, and doing the same thing with animals. But then also, we do like storytelling, seed saving, and creating the resources. So we go all over the place. We go visit different tribal communities. We go to different Indian Ed programs, different schools, different Native orgs. Wherever people want to learn these kind of things, we're happy to go out there. The thing is, what we make our business model very unique is that we practice the economies of generosity. So being in a capitalistic world, everything's ran in that capitalistic setting where everybody wants to get as much as they can for as little as possible. Like get as much of a service as can and pay as little as possible, and vice versa. They want to give a service and get as much money as they can out of it. And we don't practice that way. We just practice economies of generosity, and when I say that, I just say, I'll give you as much as I can. In return, I hope that you guys will do the same. And so that everybody wins. So, some organizations, some schools, some native tribal communities, they have lots of money. They get the grant money and they need to spend down money so they can be very generous. And I always make sure I do the same thing wherever I go. But then there's some places where they don't get much funding and, they don't get the opportunity to bring in much guest speakers or do much workshops and stuff like that is because of the lack of funding. But, I'll still go out there because, I think that they deserve this and that there shouldn't be any restrictions or barriers to learn these things. So at the end of the day, it all kind of equals out. If I'm getting a very generous donor and sometimes just scratching even or even losing money, it'll all equate equal. And then also with that, then I'm reaching a larger audience. More people can access this stuff. More people can learn this stuff and keep that practice going on for generations and generations. So it's a win-win for everybody. And that's how I try to strive to do my business.
Love that. The economy of generosity. If we could live in such a system, wouldn't the world be a better place? So thank you for leading by example as well.
Right.
I know you've prepared some slides, so would you like to just go into what you've prepared for our listeners or viewers?
Yeah, I would like to definitely kind of showcase what I do.
Super.
I can figure out
On the
the,
right-hand side slideshow.
there we go.
Or various.
So I often get asked where it all began, the passion. So I'll just quickly scroll through this. I've always had a passion for food growing up. My mom was a great cook. We had a little garden, but my true passion for indigenous food systems was when I started in college. I was the lead for the Native American garden, so I was entrusted with an ancient seed bundle, seeds that are 2,000, 3,000 years old, even before Jesus is walking around. So these are some really old and ancient seeds, and I was trusted with them and had to learn their songs, their stories, their history. And as we grew those seeds, we hosted a community feast. So to talk about how you might see that food in a traditional meal. This isn't really the most capture of the best photos, but this was from the community feast, which is some like gate okosom and squash, which is the ancient seed, the pecans, which are native, fry bread, which is a survival food, and some deer meat gravy, wild rice, squash soup, and stuff like that. And at the same time, I was learning my native language, which is a dying language, and trying to learn it how to do it within food and keeping that stuff alive. And I began to do a lot of, cooking demos with the food that we're growing in the garden, working with youth, and I had to stick around with the summer because, of course, I was taking care of this garden. I couldn't go back home, and I was noticing that at our farmers market, we had a lot of low income families in the community that couldn't afford to go to these farmers markets and get the fresh local produce. And a lot of them are native families. So me and my supervisor, Mary Jo Forboard, went to the Board of Commerce and requested funding for SNAP EBT, which is like a food benefit program. And we're able to bring that to the market and help, these families get this local produce and then also double their spending power. And as I continued working in the indigenous food systems, I would go to different conferences, meet a bunch of different people, and trade these ancient seeds and keep their stories intact and make sure that these seeds are getting out there. And these seeds are so important. We look at them as like a relative. They're like the womb of Mother Earth, and those seed banks are always asking me for those seeds, and fortunately, I just can't give them away because there's a lot of fear that goes into those seeds. I have to run ceremony for them twice a year, in the spring and the fall, and these are the seeds that we're trying to take away from us. A lot of these seeds were woven into the women's hem of their dresses during during colonization. They knew that power can be controlled through food. So they would often relocate us, make us not be able to carry our food with us, and take us to unknown lands. So our women, just being so smart, they would sow the seeds into their dresses and stuff. So as while they walked, those seeds stayed with them, and that they could be planted into new communities. And while my time in Morris was coming to an end, this is when I really started thinking about how I want to move forward with my life, how to preserve what I wrote down or what I've learned. So I wrote a book called Eating with the Seasons Anishinaabe Great Lakes region. It's a seasonal cookbook that incorporates Anishinaabe language and cultural lessons. And it's I have soft cover copies available for sale, but like I was saying, I didn't want there to be any restrictions or barriers for people to learn this stuff. So there's a free ebook option where you can just easily download it to your phone or any computer or tablet, and you can read it instantly and have it for free. And then also, this was like during when COVID hit, and our food shelf shut down because it was ran by a high risk population, like some elderly ladies. So me and Mary Jo Forboard, we took on the manager position and reopened up the food shelf and made sure that kept going. So that was really the start of my work within the food systems, growing the food, learning how to cook the food and present it at community feasts, getting involved with food insecurity, whether it was at the farmer's market or the food shelf, and then starting to think about creating resources and starting a legacy. And after I graduated from college, Sean Sherman, the owner of Natives, he has the Indigenous Food Lab and now the popular native restaurant Awamini. He offered me a position at the Indigenous Food Lab, and that was where I kind of started working with more interesting ingredients like wild game and starting to develop more chefy skills. And I was there for a good while, maybe 6 months or so, and learned some great skills. And then I got a job offer from Division of Indian Work. That's where I'm at now. So the work that I'm doing now is learning from elders, doing community work, working with youth, building community, doing stuff that's very holistic approach to food, doing different culinary creations and revitalizing our traditional foodways, indigenous foodways, and fusion, and creating resources and cultural exchange. So this is where I work now. It's Division of Indian Work. We're a nonprofit based in Minneapolis. We are we support our urban native community by offering a lot of different resources. We have like a youth program. We have a young women's program that are mothers or about to be mothers, and hook them up with doulas and do traditional birthing practices. We offer a lot of different programs like that and different resources like a food shelf, a diaper bank, a milk bank. And my role here, I'm the traditional foods and nutrition program coordinator. So I cook for our programs, cooking healthy, culturally appropriate foods. And then over here, Wiisinig LLC, this is my enterprise that I do with doing education around these indigenous foodways. So for us, we work a lot with our elders, learning from our elders. Our elders are our knowledge keepers, and this is where I spend a lot of my time visiting different elders. Right here, this is Hope Flanagan, Nedunsikwe. She teaches me so much about wild plants. She's a wild plant expert, and next week we're actually going up to Canada for like a week to do some ceremonies and go and picking different plants. So she's been such a treasure in my life, and without her, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. So I definitely want to, mention her and give her thanks, and she's really helped me on my journey. So what she often talks about is that we have to be like a hollow reed. So when I say that, is like as being a reed, you want to be as clean as possible. You want to be hollow as possible, almost like a bone. And the more junk you have inside you, whether it's you're abusing drugs or alcohol or gossiping or not eating good, that bone is going to be more clogged up. And if you think about water as being, like a spirit or goodness or knowledge, the more that bone is clogged up, the harder that water will flow through that reed or that bone. So you want to be as clean as possible so that water can flow through you, that knowledge can go through you. because the stuff that I go around and teach, it's not my knowledge. It's stuff that I've learned from my elders, and that from they learned from their elders and their elders and their elders. This is thousands of years of knowledge that's being passed down. So the more clean you are, the more it can flow through you into the next generation. There's just some baguaji openes. It's our American groundnut or our wild little potatoes. This was the belated Bill Schaff, Giwaden B'nai Siban. He was showing me his swamp tea, pick and spot. This is like very good medicine. People use this when they're sick. So harvesting that for the community, people that need it. And this was up at my community, Red Cliff, Misquabican. Here I was doing a beaver workshop. I was teaching about the beaver. So when I'm doing this kind of work, it's not just teaching how to cook it up, because every plant and every animal has a gift and they offer so much to us. So it's hard to do this. It's hard to find people to join the team because it requires so much knowledge, it requires so much skills, it requires so much training. So, while I have this beaver here, I'll talk about the beaver, for example. Uh, there's stories about the beavers, there's lessons about the beavers, there's teachings about like medicine about the beavers, the food. So I'll just quickly share it all. So we can look at that beaver and it teaches us to use our gifts. In the Bible, it talks about the parable of the talents. This is the beaver gives us that same parable. So the beaver's teeth, it never stops growing in its lifetime. Their teeth never stop growing, so they constantly need to chew on branches, chop down trees to keep its teeth down. Well, if that beaver stops using its gift, its teeth will keep growing and keep growing until it pierces its own body and end up killing itself. So it's that same message. You have to use the gifts that Creator given you in order to live a good life, in order to live your life. So I often, when I'm going to teach the kids, I tell them about that lesson, every plant, every animal, every human has a gift. And if we're not figuring out what that gift is, or if we're not honoring that gift, we're going to be killing ourselves. Maybe not physically, but spiritually. So, it's really important to, get our young ones to think like this, because right now, I mean, all over the world, but it's heavily affected in our community. There's a lot of depression, anxiety, stress, confusion. And for the kids to know that, they have a purpose here on this earth, it's very empowering, and it'll help them, stay alive and to be happy and successful. So not only, that beaver has that story, but it has tons of medicines inside. You can take the casters out, the castor glands, and you can use that for medicine. It's a very strong protection medicine. You can also use it to set live traps. Those animals are really attracted to the smell of the casters. So you can use it like that. You can also mix it up with other medicines and burn it. And you can help smudge people down that are dealing with addiction from drugs, and it kind of helps alleviate that spirit of addiction. People will render the fat. The fat is also used for medicine. You can rub it on parts where you have aches and pains, because those beavers, they eat the plant that make aspirin. Those willows, they have a slight pain relief medicine. So all that pain relief medicine stores into their fat, and then when you render that fat, you can apply it onto you. People also use the front paws for good luck charms, and I'm sure there are a few more that I'm just blanking on at the moment. Not only that, but it's great food. We can eat the beaver. It's probably one of the best things that you can eat, because it eats the medicine on the land and the water. Not many animals do that, so you're getting a lot of medicine when you eat that. And then the pelts. They have one of the warmest pelts in the world. They have 2 layers of hair and are covered in oil, so it can keep you very warm. So teaching how to make gloves and how to make the hats and stuff like that. So having to learn all of that and being able to present that. So here's some beaver soup, and here's the pelt that I stretched on a willow hoop, which will be used for making hats and gloves in the future for a different workshop. So then working with the youth and doing community, it's important to teach our kids how to do this at a young age. This is over at a church. They have a garden at their church, St. Luke's Presbyterian Church, and just teaching the kids how to go out in the garden and see what plants are ready now and how to cook with them so they can identify these things and get some skills at a young age. This is some salsa that we made from the garden. And then the younger that they are, the more they will be prepared for the future. So it's very important to get our young ones to think like this very early. So this was a black bear that was gifted to me, a Macoons. And here I was learning how to cook it up for ceremony. And there's that young man, Xavier, trying that little bear piece and really enjoyed it. And I work with a lot of city kids, and if it was up to them, they would like want me to make pizza every day and have some hot Takis. But if they start at a young age trying these very, I don't want to say bizarre, but more unusual foods and learn how to cook it and be there for the process, they'll be a lot more open and perceptive to eating these things. So in Minneapolis here, we have our immersion school called Wachoye, and they speak Anishinaabe all day, and maybe like for 10 or 15 minutes they get to speak English. So they're just totally dived into the culture. And I'll go over there, I'll bring in like a cedar braised smoked duck, some smoked fish and some fish skins, and they'll devour it. But my kids here, they wouldn't want to eat that stuff. And another example, one time that teacher came in the classroom with a bear heart and some Skittles, and every single kid in the classroom wanted to eat the bear heart. So getting our young ones to be involved in this stuff early is really gonna help them, be more open and perceptive to this when they get those teenage years. You know, I think a lot of not we eat such very sterile and ultra processed foods. So that's why you're seeing a lot of people have like allergy restrictions or get sick very easily. So the more foods you eat that are wild, the more diversified your gut microbiome will be, which will make you stronger and healthier. And also the wild food actually just makes you stronger. It's better food for you to eat. So in our culture on Anishinaabe, the way we look at food in the language is that we divide it into two categories. We have the Oasiog and the Wakanag. The Oasiog are the wild ones, where the Wakanag are the domesticated ones. And that word Wakanag actually doesn't translate to domesticated, it actually translates to like the enslaved ones. So if you think like you are what you eat, you're gonna want to eat those wild ones as opposed to the enslaved ones, because you're gonna want to have that wild spirit. You're gonna want to feel wild and not be so tamed and domesticated like those plants that you might find at a farm or a garden or a big egg. So it's it's a very interesting concept to think about, and I think it's important to think about because you saw with kind of like COVID and stuff like that, our food system, our supply chain can be very delicate, and just the whole thing can go out of whack pretty easily. So you want to know how to find foods out in the wild and take care of yourself in that way. And yeah, so same thing with the plants. You can use them for food, medicine, and utility. So here, as I was teaching a class about our nettles, and I made some nettle tea, which is good for arthritis and an anti-inflammatory. Then I made a delicious hummus with the nettles as well. But then also in the wintertime, you can harvest the dead stalks, and you can kind of break it up into a fiber and twist it into twine. And that's how we used to make our fish nets back in the day. So here I was teaching the kids how to make bracelets out of those nettle stalks, and the kids got to learn that skill themselves, breaking down the nettles, learn how to make twine with their hands and teeth, and then fashion themselves a little bracelet. So yeah, like I was saying, it goes beyond just cooking, learning how to skin animals, how to preserve the hide, because it's what we use for clothing, that's what we use for bags. It's an important material. We don't want to waste anything. So this is a fisher we're working on. Here's some of the kids holding the dead fisher up. I like that photo. And, so this is up at my res, Muskoka for winter camp. They're cutting up a raccoon, and then they're cooking it over a fire. So when the kids get to have their hands on like this, man, it's like a totally different energy. If I went there with cooked raccoon, I think maybe 1% of the kids would have tried it. But if they see it out on the table, and I'm like, here, take this knife, skim this fat off, cut it up, they'll want to eat it. And matter of fact, I had a group of boys, they're like, hey, can you cut open the head? I want to see the brains. And I was like, all right, we're gonna respect this animal. If I'm gonna cut open the skull, you're gonna eat the brains. And they're like, no, no, I don't want to do that. No, no, no. And then maybe every 40 minutes they'd come back, ask again, ask again. And I was after like the third time, fourth time asking, I was like, hey, if you guys want me to take the brains, I'll go to my car right now, grab my bone saw, and we'll cook it up. But you have to promise you'll eat it. And finally they agreed. So we cut open the skull, took out the brains, cooked it over the fire. And man, those kids loved it. They loved eating the brains. It had we didn't season up anything. We just cooked it as it is in some tin foil over the fire. And it had that same taste and texture to like scrambled eggs. So I was like, man, if you put some salt and pepper in there, some creme fraiche and some chives, it'd be like a Michelin star dish. And all those kids loved it, and they were so brave to do that. It was awesome, great experience. So here's just me talking to a class, talking about Ojibwe culture, and then we did some cooking together, cooking all indigenous foods, stuff like that. There's so then also doing like different tastings, different foods. So I did like a wild berry class and a wild nut class where I brought in like 20 to 30 different kinds of wild berries and a few different kinds of wild nuts, and the kids get to try them and learn about them. And another important thing that I like to bring up is like with our wild foods, we are so far removed from it, from colonialization, and these foods are healing to us. And studies are starting to finally capture this, improve this. So, for example, as I was talking about earlier, a lot of our people have anxiety, depression, high rates of suicide, and a lot of that is contributed to historical trauma. It's trauma that's been passed down from generation to generation. And they're starting to find that our indigenous foods, like the aronia berries, can actually help offset this. So I don't know too much about epigenetics, but epigenetics is kind of like fragments within the DNA that are kind of damaged that can cause anxiety, depression, and stuff like that. And it's linked to historical trauma. So as we got put into reserves and we're not allowed to hunt, fish, gather, or nothing, we weren't allowed to eat these foods. So the foods were never allowed to heal us. But now they're starting to find findings that as you eat these indigenous foods, you eat these foods that we're supposed to be eating, they actually help your epigenetics. So I think that's very interesting, and it makes a lot of sense because it was hard for us to heal because we lost the food knowledge and we weren't allowed to harvest it. So now as more of us are starting to eat our indigenous foods, our community's healing, our individuals are healing, and it's very promising for the future. And then just doing like side by side classes. These are really fun. This was I snared like a snowshoe hare, so it was like a snared wild rabbit and then a domesticated farm rabbit. And you can see the difference in the meat. So the wild rabbit, the meat was very red. It was like a dark meat. That's because of all the blood that's going to the muscles. Whereas the domesticated rabbit, the farm rabbit, was just very fatty and a white meat because it's just stuck in a small cage all day and just kind of fed to be fat and to be as big as possible. And then not only to see the difference within the anatomy, but then also the taste, because the wild one is eating all the wild foods. So it has a completely different taste from the domesticated one, which is just eating like farm food or whatever they're feeding them. Here's making some choke cherry patties and dry them on some birch bark to absorb the medicine. So this was a class where it was a very big class. We had 40 kids, and this is all the food that the kids got to try in that one class. We just had everything laid out, and just told the kids, here, take care of this. We're gonna cook it. You guys are gonna cook it up, and we'll have myself and a couple others in the room to guide you if you need to have any questions. So just really strengthening their gut microbiome, really getting familiar with what's all around us and stuff like that. And then also sharing like cultural teachings. So like as you can see there, we serve some snapping turtle liver. So the snapping turtles, you can eat the heart for like a long life. So a lot of people eat it like 3 times in their life when they're like very like an infant, like a teenager, and then when you get a little bit older, it helps you have like a longer life. And then the snapping turtle liver, you would eat that to make you hard to kill. So a lot of people before they went out to war, they would eat this, and then it'd make them more difficult to kill. Then working with community, starting to, bring people together. Like we have this indigenous food network here in Minneapolis, and this is a great example, like the show is these acorns. So there was a bur oak acorn tree that was under tons of stress and it just wanted to give its life. So it started shedding off its acorns very early. So one day I bike over there, harvest a whole bunch, bike home, and then I'm looking at this big bag of acorns. I'm like, oh gosh, took me a long time to harvest all of those, and now I gotta crack them all, which is gonna take even longer. Well, the next week I went with these group of ladies and we harvested the same amount that I harvested in like, 5, 10 minutes. And then we all went back to Division of Indian work and started cracking them together, sharing stories, laughing, daring each other to eat the grubs that are sometimes hide in the acorns. So, uh, it's a way of building community, a way of building relationships. When you're doing this stuff together, it's so much fun as opposed to doing it alone. And back in the day, you wouldn't do this stuff alone. So here's another example: is like going out and going spearing walleye. You spear and catch all these walleyes in nets, and then you have a whole bunch of fish, and you gotta fillet them. And that can be a daunting task by yourself, but when you're with a group of people, you can do it very fast, and you have the company, and you can make it very enjoyable, and it's a very memorable experience. So, starting to develop communities within different food networks and um, it's definitely the way that we have to do it. So starting to think about how are we going to do this as a community? What gifts do people have, and starting to connect people on that way. And it goes beyond food. I mean, I wouldn't eat a bald eagle because they're a very sacred animal to us, but we use them for medicine, we use them for regalia, stuff like that. So another called me up saying that she got one and she wanted me to help out, pluck the feathers and take out the medicines and stuff like that. So just being a good relative and showing up and doing my part is all I can do. How are we doing on time? I got a lot of stories and I just want to make sure that I'm getting to it.
If I think along the way, and I know I could listen to you for hours,
Uh,
we don't want to miss as well some because I'm sure you inspired others to maybe do something in their communities as well. So if you can focus a little bit as well on the challenges maybe that you faced along the way to start doing this community work, to start working with some of these ingredients, but as you said, can be very different. So if you can focus on that a little bit, I think that'd be really great for people to hear.
right. So the challenges are definitely finding people that are interested in this kind of stuff. So it's really hitting them at a young age and making sure that it's very cool. So when I go, because a lot of times, you like as a young person, you look at an older person and you oh, I don't want to listen to this. This person's boring. This person's not cool. So having young people, in the community, like myself, you can kind of inspire, you can kind of hit the younger audience a lot better. And then to let them know that you can be happy and successful and do it all within the culture. I think that's really good selling points because a lot of days everyone kind of thinks that you have to, have like a job where you're sitting behind a desk or be an accountant and you need to make a whole bunch of money. But if you find something that you really love, you can do it. So, there's space, we need like spaces for everybody, and it's all interconnected. So We need young ones that are interested in about trees and learn about what the tree populations are like, how the ash trees are being affected by the emerald ash borer, when to harvest the bark, how to make different canoes or houses with the bark. We need people that can study the water and be marine biologists. We need people that can study the stars and stuff like that. So letting the kids know this at a young age is very important. And also just when you're talking to an older audience, just let them know that it's never too late to make baby steps to make a stride to do better things. It's but the main challenge is that it's not an easy life to live. Especially, people have to pay bills and people have to, kind of fall into like society, or they can look kind of weird. And it kind of takes like a leap of faith and kind of just putting in that extra work to take care of yourself. I mean, it's a lot of money to go to a grocery store, but if people can start to understand that, you can get everything off the land and you'd save so much money. I haven't been like grocery shopping close to 3 years now. I can find all my wild seasonings, all my protein, all my carbs, everything out in the woods. And for people to kind of hear that, it might inspire them.
Well, you definitely anticipated my next question already, what advice you would give. If I can just ask a little bit on that. So the leap of faith, you said, would be something, sometimes you just got to have a leap of faith.
Right.
What is it that gives you strength in this process? Because they're both probably good and bad days.
Right. One thing that brings me a lot of joy and a lot of strength is kind of see like the fruits of the labor. So, sometimes I'll like leave a classroom and stuff like that. And like a youth will add me on like one of my social media pages and kind of like thank me, which is just
Mhm.
so remarkable for them to go out their way and reach out to me and be like, thank you, Derek, for coming to my class today. I learned a lot, and a lot of that stuff really resonated with me. And, I learned, how to do this and how to do that. And it made me feel strong and gave me hope and all that kind of good stuff. It really touches me, because when I was in school, I would never think to do anything like that, reach out to a guest speaker, because it was never, a lot of the stuff that I was learning in school wasn't so interesting. So to get feedback like that and knowing that, the young ones are really, being touched by it. And even the elders, the other day I was at a naming ceremony and this elder came up to me and was like, yeah, I was at one of your cooking demos the other week and I really liked that story. It really resonated with me. So just kind of seeing like the fruits of the labor, that brings
Mhm.
me a lot of strength and helps me continue this work. Then there's obviously some bad days. I'll go to a school that's, not in the best neighborhood or anything like that, and the kids will just be very disrespectful and not listen and stuff like that. And it is what it is, but I'm sure that even it doesn't seem like they're listening or not enjoying the class, I'm sure that's maybe something resonated with them. I just try not to beat myself up over it and just know that I'm doing my best to help out these kids, and that's all I can do.
Thank you for sharing that. I have two more questions, and one of them
Yes.
would be really now thinking, how does the future look like? Like, what's your intention? How would you see this work growing now into reaching more people, more communities, possibly? So I'm really curious to hear from you about that.
Well, I think it's really strength in numbers and really connecting indigenous communities together. So that's another thing that I do is I'll do cultural exchange. So I'll go visit different tribal communities and really pick each other's brains. Like I was saying earlier, colonialism has affected different tribal communities in different ways. So with
Mhm.
my people, the Anishinaabe, we're so far removed from our food and so far removed from our language. But maybe a tribe over in Africa, they kept that intact, but maybe they lost their traditional arts or traditional music or textiles or whatever. So going to pick each other's brains, you really get to revitalize knowledge. This tribe I visited in Panama, this chief right here, he talked about us indigenous people, we all stem from that same tree of life. That's why I see a lot of the ceremonies and culture and traditions very similar. So to give a good example on this is I was visiting the Jaros tribe here in Ethiopia. And when I arrived, all these ladies, they present me sweetgrass. I was like, what? You guys have sweetgrass over here? Sweetgrass is one of our four sacred medicines. So I was asking them, I was like, okay, what do you guys do with this? How do you guys use it? And when they kill an animal, they drain its blood and they consume it. But first, they put the sweetgrass in there and mix it all up in, and it has anti-coagulant properties. So it prevents the blood from clotting and it keeps it nice and smooth for cooking with or for drinking it. And I was like, okay, let me try that here. And sure enough, it has the same property. And back in the day, you would waste nothing. You wouldn't waste blood. It's very nutritious. So I'm sure people had that same technique mixing our sweetgrass in with that blood, but due to colonialism, it's been lost. So visiting different tribal communities, it can revitalize a lot of knowledge, and it it goes so deep. I mean, studying their foods. I have a chef friend from Ghana. They make this dish called wasa wasa, and the yams are indigenous to his region. So they peel the yams, and instead of discarding the skin, they let the skins dry out. They dry it, pound it, turn it into a powder, and steam it, and it kind of turns into a couscous. So I'm like, okay, well, we have tons of wild potatoes here. We have the wapato, the bagwaji openes, and really nobody harvests it. I probably only know like one or two people that know how to harvest it, but they discard the peel. So I'm like, okay, well, this would be a worthwhile experiment. I'm yet to try it, but I'm sure it'll work. So learning from different indigenous communities, revitalizing our knowledge, I think it's important because it's going to help everybody. It's going to prevent food waste. It's going to, it's so helpful.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love that cultural exchange that strengthens the work that we do as individuals, but also collectively. So we try exactly with this series as well on social gastronomy in practice is that to co-learn and get inspired. So it's in a different sphere, but thank you for sharing that. And let's say also these sessions we do, lots of people that will be listening want to do something. They're change makers in their own respective ways, but also want to do more. So I'm sure there are people that got inspired in these workshops and community building activities, even the cultural exchange is an activity by itself, right? So what would you recommend? How can people get started in their own communities?
Right. Well, like I was saying earlier with my definition of social gastronomy is like first step is learning how to be a good relative, taking care of yourself, taking care of others, taking care of the plants, the animals, the water. Because without those resources, without each other, we're not going to move forward. So that's the number one step. And then just find a community that you can put yourself in and figure out what your gift is, like what that beaver talks about, and honor that gift. And um, it's going to be so helpful. I mean, maybe you're a lawyer and maybe you can advocate for protecting the land and you can use your gift in that way if you're great at debating or doing policy work. I mean, there's a place for everybody, and doorways will open when you're walking in a good way. So there's not a direct answer because everybody is so different
Mhm.
in every way. So you just have to figure out what gifts, what talents you have and contribute in that way.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure there'll be lots of follow-up questions. For now, thank you for sharing your story, what you do, and also a little bit about how you want to continue growing that work. So thank you again, and thank you those that are in the room. For now, the podcast part of the series is going to close, and we can't wait to post it very soon. So thank you, Derek.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.